Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Farmer to Farmer panel featuring Steve Kraszewski from Maryland and Monte Bottens from Illinois. We are excited to have them with us today to share their experiences and insights from using cover crops on their farms. My name is Shannon Muller, and I'm a soil health educator with the Soil Health Institute. My colleagues, Odine Alvarez with the Soil Health Institute, and Olivia Cayuette with the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture are also on the call providing technical support. The three of us support the education component of Farmers for Soil Health. The purpose of today's webinar is to learn directly from farmers about their experiences implementing and managing cover crops, including what has worked, what they've learned, and what they've observed in the field. Today's webinar is supported by Farmers for Soil Health, or FSH. This initiative is one of several USDA-funded Advancing Markets for Producers projects. FSH is a collaboration among commodity organizations, the Soy Checkoff, the National Corn Growers Association, and the Pork Checkoff, with a shared goal to increase cover crop adoption. Through this project, farmers, whether new to cover crops or already experienced, may be eligible for financial incentives. State-level commodity organizations and conservation professionals work across 20 states, from the Dakotas to the East Coast, to provide local technical assistance and outreach. The general enrollment deadline for fall 2026 planted cover crops is August 31st, although enrollment details and program availability vary by state. We encourage interested farmers to visit farmersforsoilhealth.com/enrollment for the most up-to-date information. We also have a website full of cover crop and soil health related resources. Lastly, a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded, and an email will be sent with a link to the recording, which will be posted on the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture YouTube channel. The panel discussion and Q&A will be moderated by Olivia. As questions come up, please enter them in the Q&A box. You can also upvote questions you'd like us to prioritize. If you would like to enable captions, click the three dots on your toolbar and select Captions. Finally, please stay until the end for information on Certified Crop Advisor continuing education units available for attending this webinar. With that, I'm excited to welcome our panelists, Steve and Monte. I'll pass it over to Olivia to get us started.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Really excited to have an hour with Monte and Steve. So we kind of envisioned that this would be an opportunity to hear your story related to cover crops, where you started, what you've learned along the way, what you're experimenting with and looking forward to doing in the future. And so just to get started, I'm wondering, Monte, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your operation, what you're up to in Illinois.
Well, hi there. We're in Northwest Illinois. We have about 2,800 acres, primarily corn and bean rotation, non-GMO, both non-GMO corn and beans. We do some cover crop seed production, triticale and oats. We also raise some grass-fed beef on cover crops, both that are planted after the small grains or cover crops ahead of soybeans in the spring. And then that business is direct to consumer, where we sell the animals primarily by the cut, and some quarters and halves. We started into cover crops about 10, 12 years ago, so we certainly weren't at the beginning stages of that. Not like Dave Brandt was for 54 years ago is when he started. And reality is that for my grandfather, talking to my dad, cover crops, that's what you did, because you couldn't buy fertilizer. And so you had a lot of green manure crops and those kind of things. So we're back to doing a little bit of what we always used to do. And we've had some surprises along the way. It'll be fun to share here later on, but we're a lot of HEL ground, highly erodible land, and we did it primarily for erosion control. And lo and behold, by dumb luck, we found out that one of the greatest benefits is weed suppression. So I've got some photos around that we can share later. But yeah, that's kind of overview of our farm, Henry County, Illinois, right where Interstate 80 crosses into Iowa.
Great. Thank you so much, Monty. And Steve, if you could, tell us a little bit about your background, what you're up to there in Maryland.
Yeah, sure thing. Happy to be here talking about cover crops with Monte. Yeah, we are located on the Maryland's eastern shore in Queen Anne's County. We are just about 60 minutes, about an hour away from DC, and with a lot of metro areas around us. Just across the bridge, Baltimore. North of us is Philadelphia. A few more hours, you're at New York City, and yeah, we've been growing organic corn, soybeans primarily for a number of years. My father-in-law started the organic operation. It's a family farm. My wife and I are the fifth generation on the farm, and hopefully our kids will be the sixth and they'll want to continue. And but the organic operation started about 2006 when we started transitioning piece by piece, and we became fully certified organic in about, I think it's 2018 for all of our ground. And actually, we're back at it again. We're going to have some transitional ground. We have some already this year, some more next year, and we'll be up to about 1,100 acres of ground in total, all certified. I think by 2020, the end of 2028 is what it looks like now. 29, excuse me. And so that keeps us really busy. But the cover crops, since that's what we're here to talk about, have been a real key part of keeping the operation going. First, in general, they were put in for legume, for example, was put in for the nitrogen for the corn, and then my father-in-law started doing his research, and we started toying around with mixtures for no-till soybeans, and I've taken it farther into trying to look at ways for no-till corn or strip-till corn and new tools and different ways of using the cover crops to be kind of like another hand around the farm, another laborer, and but keeping those crops growing, as we'll talk about, really has a lot of its benefits. We'll see a lot of ways that we can, and I know this is a problem everywhere, to organize our season because the lack of help. We have cover crops that we can use in a strategic way. So it's still a great experiment and it's ongoing, and we love doing it.
Great, Steve. Really appreciate you sharing that. And if you could keep that same line of thought, I'm wondering if you could take us back to when you started with your father-in-law implementing covers. Was there an early success, or what was the impetus to start, and then what kind of encouraged you to keep utilizing them?
Great question. We started, or my father-in-law kind of started just with the basics, single species cover crops. Our main legume was crimson clover. It can do very, very well. And that was used for corn. It would be following soybeans. It's a 2-year rotation, or a really condensed rotation. There's not a whole lot of opportunities for diversity or extended rotation. So you need high producing annuals. Crimson clover is one of them. And starting with that, we are able to produce a lot of nitrogen. We were plowing it under in the spring. It would be flown on into the soybeans with an airplane, which made it very convenient. And not a lot of work to do there. Falls in the beans, you get a couple rain showers. Things start to come up. They go dormant in the winter, come on strong in the spring, and you have almost half of your nitrogen. The problem the main thing was it was already at the same time. It was all crimson clover. If half your crop was going into corn, you all had to terminate at the same time, and that's usually the beginning of May when it's flowering. You shoot for about 50% flowering. That's about the maximum peak nitrogen production. But once it was all down, you would come into an issue situation where, as you're planting or you're plowing, weather would intervene, and then you'd have to start figuring out what to do next. If the ground is wet, what would you do? Where would you go? What do you take care of? You start to have issues with you start making compromises maybe real early in the planting season, and that became a problem.
And Monty, I know you and your father have a long history of no-tilling. Could you take us back to that point in time where you added cover crops into your operation?
Yeah, we added cover crops in. We started out our first year um, with aerial applied cover crops. They were inconsistent, to say the least. The second year, we thought we've got this figured out. We're going to go in with a Hagee. About 60 miles away, a person had a Hagee high clearance sprayer they had modified with air box and drops, and thought this is the way to do it. It'll follow our land and everything. And we went out there, and again, we had very poor results. We had a very dense canopy. It was funny. We had one that was pretty upright leaves, and we were excited, but boy, this is going to work here. And then another one that had broad leaves, and like, going to worry about that. And of course, the one that had the broad leaves and more shade, that's the one that grew the better cover crop. So it was kind of ironic, but still, it was poor. We actually found a lot of the earthworms were going out and gathering the seeds and pulling them into their middens. And we'd have like 3 or 5 little seed tufts coming out of the earthworm middens and nothing in between. So we'll probably have legacy cereal rye in our field for who knows how long. But it was interesting to see. And after that, we decided to skip the spread and hope type, and we went and purchased a John Deere drill, and we ran that for several years. We've recently switched to a Horsch Avatar. After you have a John Deere drill and you go to a Horsch Avatar, you really appreciate life. You go from 64 rows times 4 grease zerks that you're crawling on your belly to, like 300 grease zerks to 4, and able to actually reach the row units instead of crawl underneath. And so we do that, and then plus it allows us to do indexing. We think indexing cover crops in corn is really important. So that's how we've done it to make it work in a no-till situation. Now I think there's merit in doing a stand with like a vertical till. So if a farmer has corn stalks and they have an air box on a VT machine to get it seeded that way, and you're going soybeans next year, that's a very viable alternative, lower cost per acre than running a drill. I understand that. I've just always been leery of the layer that we're putting in the soil 1 to 2 inches down, because you can see a lot of sheeting erosion from those things. But if you're running it in fall under drier conditions, less of a chance of causing that sheeting problem than running a vertical till in the spring when it's too wet, because you're running them, of course, to dry them out. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at, and how we made that transition was by going to a no-till drill. And then, so today we have a 40-foot no-till drill and a 60-foot planter. So we use implement guidance so everything lines up. And I got some photos I can show too of our corridor thing that we kind of came up with early on that is kind of really catching on now across many areas of the country.
That'd be great. Anytime you want to pop up those photos, Monty. You
I'll
want to do
work.
that right now?
Yeah, well, I'll work on that. See, that's a
Yeah, take your time.
technical skill required here. So,
Hey, I had a quick
And we've
question
got,
for you, Monty.
yeah,
I'm sorry, Olivia.
no, go ahead, Steve.
You used the term when you started talking, Monty, indexing cover crops. What do you mean by that?
well, it's a good thing I've almost got this technology figured out here, and we're gonna get to that hopefully.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm probably showing a screen of my screen. Here we
Yeah,
go.
looks good.
Uh, so I'm gonna get to those photos. Okay, here you go. So row corridors. This is where you did it to John Deere, where we'd plug every 4th row. So those cover crop rows there are 7.5 inches apart, and it leaves a 15-inch gap.
Yep.
So I originally designed this. I had a second air box on the John Deere drill that I would plant radish and oats with. So there'd be radish and oats in that bare spot in the spring, but they were growing in the fall, so they're winter terminated. However, I'm far enough north that I never did get good growth out of the radish and oats. So I just took the box off and didn't mess with it anymore. But that there is how we do it. There's our current Horsch planter. It's on 10-inch. But you can see here, if I zoom in, see how the row units are splitting that. So here I'm planting corn into that cover crop in the spring. And if you look carefully, you'll see the really long straw there. And that's from the previous year's cover crop. So in my beans, I let it go big. I like lots of cover in my beans. I've actually found the practice of letting the beans get up to V3. So I plant normal time frame, May 10th range, let them get up to V3, and that gives a chance for the rye to head out, and then I'll roller crimp it down. And the roller crimping, if it's far enough along, will kill the rye without having to use glyphosate or Liberty, Paraquat, Plethodin, any of those. So if I can do a mechanical termination, I try to do that. And then, but that leaves a really high carbon nitrogen ratio cover crop on the surface of the soil. You get lots of protection, lots of weed control, and you can see it's still there for the following cover crop. So I grew last year's cover to protect this year's soil. And now I'm coming in and I'm planting my corn green into some smaller covers because this would be April 20th or so in our area. And I still have protection from the last because this cover crop's really not offering a lot of protection, right? It's small. When we terminate it, it'll melt and disappear right away. It don't really do a lot other than provide some extra water channels to get water in and to stimulate some microbial activity. So that works pretty well. And I'm pretty happy with that system there. I just like big monster cover crops ahead of beans. I mean, I'm doing non-GMO beans too, so it's not hard to do. I mean, cover crops ahead of beans. This is child's play. It really can work easy. Now, annual ryegrass ahead of corn. Now we're talking college level cover crops. Okay, so that's practice a little. Start with oats ahead of corn, and then get rye that you terminate 2 months ahead of corn. Then plant your corn green, but just work into it. And you got to make sure. I'm probably getting ahead of our whole thing here, but you got to make sure you have nitrogen on the planter in order to really, for corn, to make sure that the tie up from the cover crop is not negatively affecting your corn crop, and weed and feed won't do it. It's too broadcast. You've got a plethora of hungry microorganisms out there, and you spray it. You feed the masses, and there's nothing left for your corn. Banding it adjacent to the row, keeping it available for the corn, is how you can overcome some of these setbacks that can potentially enter with high biomass cover crops. So yeah, that's what those corridors are all about there. And then, just for fun, this is an old Soil Health Partnership plot, and I've kept it going now for, I think this is 12 years. And you can, even a blind agronomist can see where the cover crops were. So right there on the left side was no cover crops when I'm harvesting, and on the right is with cover crops. So pretty apparent the impact, and you can see the repeating trials over there where with and without cover crops. So that's another pretty interesting thing. So here, I'll stop sharing now so Steve can jump in and do his thing. Stop share. There we go.
That's great, Monte.
I've just been taking notes, Monty. No, that was an excellent explanation. I like how you're using implement guidance. We just started using some of that in our farm. A few different reasons. We're organic. We have cultivators, some tillage and things. But I'm starting to go down that road of being, a precision cover cropping, let's call it. Not only purposeful cover cropping. You brought up like I call planting green soybeans, planting into standing rye. Then you terminate your rye, hopefully with the roller crimper without any chemicals. Obviously, we can't use chemicals. Our timing has to be very specific, but it's right along the same avenue, what we're doing. And it works really well. Those beans, they'll be at that about V3 stage. Even a little taller, hasn't hurt before. Rolling them down, they pop right back up through the rye. We're still working on it. Still working on finding a good mix, or not a mix, maybe a good rate and good timing in the fall. That's when we establish our cover crops, and we like to get our primarily way to get cover crops going. I mean, it really depends. Best way to do that in the fall for us is to have the biggest window of time possible. We probably have a little larger, might have a slightly larger window here, maybe a little smaller because of the region we're in. We have anywhere between, just to give you an idea, at harvest, which for us could start in the end of September all the way through even mid-November. You can have good results with cover crops. You might have to change your strategy on what you're trying to do. It all depends on what problems or challenges you have, or what your goals are, what you got going on out in your field. But we can choose our small legumes that we like for nitrogen production, like our crimson clovers and our balances. They get either aerial seeded, broadcast seeded, and very light incorporation, all the way up through almost the end of October. It's certainly possible. You might have to be adjusting your rates as you go later into the season, because you're just going to get colder evenings. You might have a frost or two. You want to make sure you have enough seed out there that's going to germinate and get a little growth and then go dormant while there's still a little bit of heat. Seems like we've been getting that the last couple falls, at least in our area, in our region. And then you're going into drilling and larger seeds for, when you're on into, say, November or late October. So we'll switch from the small seeds like the Balanza clovers, the crimson clovers, working on something maybe with alfalfa, perhaps. It's a little different. Maybe we can talk about it later. But something like our hairy vetch, that can still be flown on early. But if you are hitting that kind of getting colder, you need a little seed to soil contact, you'll drill it in. We do use a John Deere drill with lots of grease zerks and then climbing through the frame, Monte. It's good calisthenics, okay? Ours is a 30-foot drill, old air drill, an 1850, and it's got the old 777 seed hopper in front of it. This thing's old. It's an old Flexicoil from the upper Midwest somewhere, and John Deere painted it green, or John Deere had them painted green, and we're still using it, but it works well. One thing we've done to modify, and it's two birds with one stone, it's that broadcast. I put an air seeder on the front of it, mounted it. It's from Einbach, so it's European, so they're not compatible. So I had to slam this together. We were flying our crimson clover over our just harvested and worked corn ground, and then I drilled a rye on top of it. And all I need to do is those press wheels need to press that small seed in, that crimson clover seed in, where the rye has to go at least an inch in, probably inch and a quarter anyway. And we do have to do a little bit of field work, bust up all that residue. We want to have a really good result with our cover crop, a really good stand. We put a lot of rye in, 2.5 bushels, because we want that biomass. And it sounds like, Monte, you like biomass for beans. Well, so do we. We're pushing on a good year, probably 9,000 to 10,000 pounds dry matter per acre by the time we're terminating and no-tilling that'd be for no-till soybeans. After we will roll first and then plant, instead of a planting green scenario. So anyway, yeah, I like how you're finding good purpose for your cover crops, and you're letting them reach their potential with a lot of biomass. That's a real key, I think, for both of our operations, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I appreciate you identifying that common thread. And I was able to pop up your photos,
yes.
Steve. Didn't know if you had anything additional to say about this one or the couple
Sure.
after.
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at corn here. We're looking at just a strip till corn. You can see the strips and the zones. The bigger picture there on the left, planting into those zones. It still needs a little work. This was a dry year to get started for us, by the way. For a little context, it would probably look a little bit different than that, but you're looking at a hairy vetch and crimson clover stand that's still flowering. You can see the purple flowers from the vetch. But with a kind of a late start and being in very dry conditions, we had a stand there. I mean, if there's another slide that you have, Olivia, you can see the corn popping up through. Yeah, a good stand to get started. It didn't look like that a little bit later, since the rain still hadn't showed up. But you can see the corn stand there on the top right picture. You see some of our no-till soybeans on the left there, the large picture on the left. And I think I'm sorry, it's a small image. There's a tool of ours. managing biomass. That's what we do here at Mason Farms Produce, biomass management. So whether it's no-till or it's a speed disc working very shallow depths, we're trying to park the plow. We're trying to just bust up that cover crop, work in the root zone, leave the subsoil intact, leave all those macropores open, those earthworms mostly intact, and just trying to break down that cover crop so it can senesce and feed our soil. It can be up to, I estimated that's another mixture of vetch and crimson. Might be a little Blance in there too. I'm not sure at the moment, but it was 90 to 100 pounds of available nitrogen alone from that field. And the corn looks really good right now out in that field in particular on the home farm here. So yeah, we like our biomass. We like our cover crops. It's just, yeah, you grow all this. What do you do with it? Well, there's a solution if you have some of the right tools, but we didn't have to throw out all the other farming practices and start over. It was just a few simple changes. Like I said, moving from that plow to a disc, actually was a good move. There's not many people that can do a good job plowing with a standard moldboard, an old International 700, but most anybody who's been around farming can use a disc. And laying off simple lands with a disc it's quite simple. Got guidance too, keeps things right where they need to be. And yeah, we can be pretty efficient with our time with that tool.
Awesome. Great to hear more about your story and get to see the visuals from both of your operations. I think one of the differences is, Monte, you have livestock. I'm wondering if you could maybe mention how livestock and covers fits into your operation.
So I worked on this a lot and trying to figure out how can we bring livestock back to the land at scale, okay, for farms. And I've tried where I've set land out. I've tried where I plant beans late and graze those covers. I've tried, also planting the short season crops and do the forages. So the whole thing is that we have to face there's certain realities. It's in a commodity system, which is a difference between me and Steve. While Steve's growing commodities, he has organic commodities. So the premium difference is there, and then plus I don't think he has the same safety net in crop insurance that we do. So the whole conventional side is just a little wonkadoo as far as really favoring corn, soy, commodity production with a guarantee. And then when you put livestock in there that don't have these guarantees and such, you're always competing against a known guarantee. So it's tough. It's very tough to do. I have settled on at the moment. I grow cover crop seed, so I can get more premium per acre than just growing wheat. So I'm trying to increase my revenue per acre with cover crop seed, and I do seed cleaning and these kind of things in order to really drive that up. But that's not scalable. Not everybody can do that, right? There's only so much cover crop seed that the world needs. Where if we could get more value out of our wheat or something or another small grain in there, but we're trying to get that off and get the summer grazing cover crops put back on, because once those are growing, and we just moved the cattle yesterday to summer grazing cover crops, I mean, those things are monsters. I mean, the 3 pounds a gain is no problem with
what are they grazing, Monte? Sorry, what are they grazing?
It's a diverse mix, but the driver in it is Brachytic dwarf, BMR, sorghum sedan grass. So we have, sunflower because it looks pretty for marketing, and hey, why not? They'll eat those oil seeds later when it frosts. There's buckwheat in there. Again, not for the cows, for the soil. There's flax for the mycorrhiza, not for the soil, or not for the cows. Put cowpeas in there, and cows don't like cowpeas, so that's just false advertising. And then there's a little bit of, I believe, Blance clover in there. crimson is toxic for cattle, so be careful there.
Mhm.
And I think our plan is we're grazing the hillsides. So I'll go back to sharing my screen again if I don't screw things up. Um, the 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 hillsides of this farm I'm working on regenerating because of the amount of where'd we go? Here we go. Um, this is the field right here. So I've done this before, and the picture on the left is where I intend to hay. So these are upslope and downslope. So the C shape around the bottom there is next to a ditch that has buffer strips in it. We'll hay that, and then the other is the hilltops, and we'll hay those things. Everything on the right is where we'll graze, and we'll use polywire and virtual fencing for accomplishing this because it's irregular shaped. So we'll actually, the cattle right now just started on the left or the west side center, and they're moving east, doing about 5 acres a day. And the rest will hay next week, and we'll hay it high in order to regrow it, and then the regrowth will graze. So we just can't keep ahead of it. I've tried staging different things in the past. We could do a 2 hour thing on all the stuff I figured out that don't work. Um, but we're trying to create some stockpile grazing opportunity and then also bale at the same time because it grows faster than what we can ever hope to graze it. So that's kind of the concept we're doing there. And I'll scroll through, make you all dizzy here. But yeah, isn't that pretty? The cattle are back on the land.
That looks fantastic.
And yeah, that's what it should be, not
I had a
things. So
question.
yeah.
As far as the cattle, do you introduce them into any of the row crops? Any part of the growing season, would they be grazing early on a mix and then you pull them out after, some good early green growth and then, think about, your corn or soybeans or anything else? Is that part of your
We'll
program, Monty?
Yeah, we'll do it ahead of soybeans, and I've delayed the soybeans up to, let's say, uh, end of May, 1st of June. You do take a hit on the soybean yield, and the problem is once you get so far past, optimum, if you're taking a 7 bushel hit, 10 bushel hit on soybeans, uh, that's a that requires a whole lot of beef per acre to make up that 7 to 10 bushel hit. So if you look at losing a bushel every other day there at the end of May, that last week is costing you 4 bushel times 12 or whatever, 50 bucks. Well, now I have to make $50 an acre of beef. Therefore, I have to make 20 pounds of beef per acre. I can't do that.
Hmm.
I just cannot do 20 pounds beef per acre per week.
Right.
So there's a cutoff period that we've learned that you just can't sacrifice those row crop acres. So this year, what we did is we left the cows on perennials. We used to take the whole herd. We left the cows on perennials, which actually kept the perennials in better shape and didn't go to seed. So we had tremendous more regrowth on our perennials and better quality regrowth on our perennials. So that was great. And then the other thing, the fats and yearlings went to covers, and we just left it to where it's the last field we're going to plant. And as soon as the planter had finished everything else, they loaded on the truck in the morning. I started planting the center of the field at like 10 a.m. We had a 4-man crew pulling down all the hardwire on the edges, had that pulled by 6 o'clock at night, and I finished up planting the field at 10. So I mean we we try to we're not going to make the row crop operation wait on the cattle. It just it's cheaper to buy hay than it is to waste yield. So
Hmm.
um, But yeah, here's an example of if there's a little bit lower value ground, a little less yield potential ground, this could work, right? The numbers are going to depend on your context. Our context is $14,000 an acre ground, 70 bushel beans, 240 bushel corn. So with good basis on each and non-GMO premium opportunities on the beans. So higher revenue per acre generation. Now, if you're an area that's lower yield, lower land value, lower basis, this can come in. But, here we are, March 9th, seeded, Trit was seeded in November, clover frost seeded in February. Here we go, 2 weeks before the cattle, you can see in the upper right there. Then we're calving. We actually used to calve on cover crops because we didn't have perennial pastures. We purchased pasture ground recently. And then July 8th, we're moving him here after we're done grazing, and we're seeding the summer crop mix there on July 8th. So, and then the following year, we did triticale again, and you can see just amazing growth out of that. That's an 18,442 tire. Huge, 7 bales per acre. Then we come back with summer grazing mix, and then we seed covers again. So that's like a 2-year version. We just shorten that all up for a 1-year version. But honestly, at this time, it's small grains with a summer cover to minimize the hit on. It's still a hit, and what we're looking at now is more this variable approach. So where are the areas of a field that are the least profitable? Well, they could probably they're probably eroded, and they probably need more carbon in the soil. And we can do that effectively because one of the things I've learned out of all of this is if I no-till, I gain 0.1% organic matter per year. If I put a cover crop on it and no-till, I gain 0.2% organic matter per year. If I no-till, cover crop, and graze it, managed grazing, not turn them out and hope for the best. We move them every day to a targeted number of acres, anywhere from 3 to 20 acres, depending on growth and herd size. If we move them every day, it's 0.4% organic matter. Now there's the magic, right? So if I can take these poor areas, cover crop and graze them, and do that enough years in a row, all of a sudden I don't have poor areas. So now there's a long-term value revenue I can bring back against the costs offsets of the grazing. So anyway, yeah, first cow in North America with virtual collars. You guys have everybody's probably seen this, how virtual collars work. Anyway, yeah, let me go ahead and stop sharing and stop hogging the meeting here. So
No, it's
anyway,
great, Monte. We've had a couple of questions come in. While we're on the topic of livestock, wondering, Monte, if you could clarify, you had mentioned you found crimson clover to be toxic for grazing cattle. What's been that experience there?
dead cows.
Really? Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, die of bloat. When they're frosted, it's a fall thing. So frost will kill them, and also if you put under stress, it'll get too many anthocyanins in them, and that'll cause them to die. Similar prussic acid in frost. Now we've never lost anything to prussic acid. That's in sorghum family. What we do there, it's pretty simple. We go ahead. Yeah, dead cows is digestive upset. You're right.
Good for the rest of the group to know. Yeah, we had a couple of surprised comments about that.
But we'll go ahead and stop them in place and hay feed them after frost, and that'll work. But if there's clover in the mix, and then sometimes you don't learn, and somehow clover got in my last mix last year, and I lost another one. I'm like, ugh, this is getting expensive these days. So, got to be careful.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
Steve, we had a question come in. I've heard of slugs in the Mid-Atlantic region. Have you had any experiences with slugs?
No, thankfully, no. I think when our schedule
Something on this.
yeah, well,
Yeah, Go for it.
It's I think with our timing, with the cover crops and producing a lot of biomass and letting them reach their potential and their full purpose is like purposeful cover cropping is another kind of little buzzword term we use around here. You're usually later into the season, so you're at least probably earliest we can get, say, corn in, for example. Just talking about corn and just a standard tillage regime, shallow tillage, but tillage regime is probably the middle of May. We planted some corn this spring, May 17th and 18th. You're looking at warmer soils, you're looking at warmer conditions. Our no-till soybeans planting into that all that huge rye, and we have our crimson clover mixed in there too. It's a nice complement with the cereal rye. Rolling it down and planting. Generally, you're not looking at cooler evenings, and a lot of that dampness for the spring, it's kind of gone, and your soil's warming up, which is just also another reason that we delay planting anyway. We do want warm soils for soybeans. They can be finicky in that no-till situation, but you can get some rain, just warmer, seasonal rain, end of the spring, early summer rain. Those things pop out of the ground. You just gotta work with your planter. You don't need a whole new setup, by the way. Talking about equipment, we didn't have to go buy an entire new planter. We put shark tooth row cleaners on. I put narrow gauge wheels on, so 3-inch wide instead of the 4 inches. Seems to follow the contour of the ground better. We do some tillage, as I mentioned, in the fall before we seed for our no-till, or before we drill our rye and for no-till beans in the spring or summer. And of course, if it's those wheels, you want your ground to be very smooth. Since we don't do a whole lot of strictly no-till, we have a little bit of disturbance, and I think I do a pretty good job in the field, but it's not always the best. It could be a little rough. If that's the case, yeah, you want your row unit to follow those contours and not to set seeds on top of the soil or very shallow. You want all the same depth, uniform emergence, and seed to soil contact. That's all very important. But that's all well within the realm of what any standard planter can do. Always have a nice sharp coulter. There's another good lesson to have there. And Monte, what do you have there?
Okay, this question, I'm wondering if this question was from a conventional grower, and I find it fascinating because you don't have the problem, Steve, as an organic grower. But Dr. John Tooker from University of Pennsylvania, he has amazing resources on this, and I did a podcast with him, the Ag Emerge podcast number 89. Listen to it. This is really mind-blowing kind of stuff. I saw him present once out at the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. But look at this. He found that the neonic seed treatments that are on like 99.9% of the conventional corn, except for yours truly, it orders mine naked. That neonic gets into the plant. See that, Steve? And then when the slug's eating the plant, it comes into the slime of the slug and exudes out, but it don't hurt the slug because the slug is a mollusk. It's not an insect. But that insecticide's in the slime. So the ground beetle, which just loves to eat slugs, eats that slug, ingests the neonic, and kills the ground beetle. So what we're doing is we're killing all of the predators for the slugs. And then the slugs get completely out of control. You're likely not seeing any issues, which you're in ground zero area for slugs. You're not seeing issues because you don't have neonics in your system. And you've got predators keeping them under control. Yes, planting later will help them grow through it and such, but long-term no-tillers using neonics, and it's just an incredible buildup in the soil. It's a 5-year half-life in the soil to get rid of it. So plant naked seed. Don't farm naked. The takeaway from today: don't farm naked. Use cover crops. Right, number one. Secondly, is don't plant naked. You want to plant naked seed. So, all right.
That's
Yeah,
great,
I
Monty.
just
that's great.
that's probably why you're not seeing it, is because you're organic. And I think,
Interesting.
yeah, and that's been documented for 10 years. But it's just weird how the seed salesman didn't tell you that, did they?
We'll be sure to
No.
include that podcast link in the follow-up email. That's a great
Yeah,
resource.
I jotted that down. Yeah, that's good. That's good to share around. Thank you, Monty.
Yeah. Another reason to be organic.
You're that
There you
close.
go.
You're very close. You love your cover crops. You're already doing non-GMO untreated. You're almost
I
there.
just can't. I know it's just the tillage kills me on the side hills. My great grandparents did it, and every time to go fix a tile line, it's 12 feet deep. And I know they didn't bury that tile line 12 feet deep or 12 feet of topsoil on top of it. So I need to get like I got some guys going to be coming up where they're using electro zappers and no till and following some of the things that are going up in Wisconsin there with Aaron Silva. Anyway, back to cover crops. Sorry, Olivia.
No, no, great, all great nuggets of information. While thinking about your operation, Monty, how do you terminate your cover crops after planting corn? That was one of the questions we had come in.
Sure. So after planting corn, we'll plant green and we will terminate pre-emerge. So because we're
Okay.
non-GMO, grasses in non-GM in corn are hard, and broadleaves in beans are hard. So we terminate pre-emerge, and in our beans we roller crimp terminate if they're jungle, type, or if we pre-emerge terminate, we're currently using glyphosate. If we pre-emerge if they don't die with the roller crimper, the clethodim that we're using to take out volunteer corn and other grasses will catch it. So again, easier to do than an
Well,
organic setting.
lots of trade-offs, different considerations, and we're coming to the end of our time, which this has just been a fantastic hour with the both of you. So much information that you've shared in a rather short amount of time. I'm wondering, Steve, we could start wrapping up with you. If you had any final thoughts for the group, or maybe any like broad considerations you'd like to share as far as cover crop adoption that you think would be helpful to add to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, maybe I'll share with you kind of, what's kind of surprised me. It was a helpful surprise. It's just started with, we have a farm stand out front. It's been around for 40 years, and my wife runs it. I help her, of course, all the time. And we have the rest of the farm. It's only about 8 acres with some sweet corn in the garden and some eye tunnels. And the rest of the farm, hundreds of acres, is the commodities. But organizing my sweet corn planting in stages. You plant it in stages. If there's some out there that don't know that, you'll plant it. We have like 12 plantings of sweet corn a year. It could be every about 5 to 6 days or so, or every week. It just depends on the weather and if it's warm or cold as you move through the planting season. But I had to organize that planting season with my cover crops. I said, well, I don't want all my I started using some legumes because you can get it in early in the fall because you're done with sweet corn early. You're done by Labor Day, basically. At least for us, that's when we close. And I've got a lot of residual heat, warm evenings still. Things come up real nice, they establish real nice, and we go into winter, and the next year is fine. But if it was all the same, if it was all crimson, I've kind of mentioned this before, it's already at the same time, and I don't want to knock it down at the same time. So as well, why don't I use different species to stagger my planting season for my sweet corn? I said that, and I started doing that, or tried to start doing that for the field crops and organizing it instead of having a big rush at once. It's like, well, take care of what you can, let the other cover crops grow, get a field of corn done, get maybe some no-till beans come if it rains, because you can get on that ground right away. I'm sure Monty's had the same experience, being able to get on ground that hasn't been tilled and has growing cover crops. It's wonderful. Things plant very nice, very little compaction, no issues. But I've used those species as kind of like another pool of labor and another way to organize my season and open those windows of opportunity when it's wet somewhere, it's dry somewhere else. If I've got cover crops still growing, I have a chance to get on the ground, I can keep working, and I don't have to try to do it all at once. Hairy vetch, for example, just keeps growing and growing. It maybe you see some flowers. It doesn't mean it's done. Crimson's different. Once it starts flowering, that's it. That's good for timing if you want some early crops, early corn, for example. But your vetch, let your later fields, maybe some wetter fields. Balanza likes wet feet. That ground that you got to wait a little bit longer, let it warm up, get some longer days, more sunshine, just warmer weather. That's a good spot for the Balanza. It's something that can wait for a week or two down the road to terminate and let senesce and break down. But anyway, the point is it organizes my season that I really need that. Rather than just, with the bare dirt, I think there's part of my father-in-law's generation. I think he thinks he doesn't trust the ground, that he can't see underneath his feet if it's covered in cover crops, right? Well, I think those roots, those living roots, are doing a whole host of different things for soil health, just being one of them. But it's organizing, it's working for me. It's doing a job or multiple jobs all at the same time when I'm in the busiest part of my season, and it's coming along. We still have I have a lot to learn, a lot more mixes to try, and different strategies to try. But it's been a great journey so far. I'm going to keep going. So that's my biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate those words. And
I
Monty,
think,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think sometimes we get maybe a little, we're told we can't do certain things. And I'll play this, and I don't know if my narration will come through, but this is just shows that you can't be afraid to do things. You can't be afraid to do things different than the neighbors. So sometimes people say you can't be prepared for weather extremes. Here's our field right here with cover crops, long-term no-till. Then we're just going to pan across the street right here. Ouch. Here's tillage and no cover crops. Look at the standing water. Just drive along here a little bit, and this is the same slope, same soil type, side by side. But good air water management makes a big difference on erosion control. Now, obviously, we know what happened. The west side of the road there, the right side, he got 2 inches more rain. That's obviously what happened. But anyway, it's interesting. It's all about the whole thing is it's about your mindset. You have to approach it with wanting to make it work. And then when you want to make it work, you're going to reach out to, guys like Steve. Bless you if you reach out to me. Good luck. But you're going to reach out to people who are doing it, and you're gonna make it work for your context. Bottom line, it's the right thing to do. As a farmer, in your gut, it's the right thing to do. There's more opportunities. There's more knowledge than ever before, more equipment than ever before, and there's more. There's more funding opportunities than ever before. I mean, it's outstanding what's there now today. So it's just like you can wait until next year when a computer's cheaper, and you can go a year without a computer. So it's a matter of just jump in, get after it. There's a lot of people who are dependent on you to save the soil for some generations to come. So reach out and make connections with people, and don't be afraid. Just forget it and go for it.
Well said,
Yeah.
Monte.
And on that note, Monty, Steve said that you'd probably appreciate the quote, "Be the farmer your neighbors are laughing at." And I appreciate that, just, experimenting, trying these new techniques, seeing how they pay off, and then expanding them to more of your operation as you see those successes. We could definitely spend another hour talking, but I appreciate both of your time. I know that you have things that you need to get back to. So with that, I'll pass it over to Shannon to close us out.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation, and we truly appreciate Steve and Monte for taking the time to share their insights. Be sure to check out Farmers for Soil Health. You can learn more at farmersforsoilhealth.com. A short Zoom survey will appear as this webinar concludes. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. For certified crop advisors and certified professional soil scientists seeking a CEU credit, now is a good time to open the CCA app and select Scan Course Code to prepare to scan the QR code. For all of our upcoming opportunities, we'll share the registration links in the chat today. If you missed them, don't worry. The follow-up email sent in the next week to everyone who registered for this webinar will include the webinar recording and registration links for upcoming opportunities. Looking ahead to September, we have 2 great webinars coming up. The first is on September 10th at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, featuring John Baranick from DTN. John will share how the building El Nino affects the weather and how those outlooks might influence your cover crop management decisions heading into the 2027 growing season. Next, on September 16th at 11:30 a.m. Central, we'll be joined by Dr. McDaniel from Iowa State University. Dr. McDaniel will share key insights from research on crop rotations and cover crops, specifically how these practices impact soil carbon, soil nitrogen, and microbial biomass. Lastly, we also want to share an exciting upcoming regional event. Groundwork is a new regional conference for Mid-Atlantic farmers who are thinking long-term about their soil, their operations, and who farms after them. This conference is taking place February 24 and 25 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Registration opens this fall, but you can join the waiting list now at groundworkagconference.com to stay updated. If you're looking to connect with peers and walk away with practical ideas for your operation, we highly encourage checking this out. Please keep an eye out for that follow-up email with the webinar recording and links to register for our upcoming opportunities. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out using the contact information on the screen. Finally, for those seeking a CCA credit, you can scan the QR code now using the CCA app, or you can email Odine using the contact information provided in the chat. And again, I want to say thank you to Monte and Steve for their time today, and thank you to everyone who attended, and hope that you have a great rest of your day.